The scent of lilies always meant death in our family. Today, they filled every corner of the funeral home, their sweetness turning my stomach as I stood beside my father's casket. I'm Amy, and this was the day I discovered just how deeply betrayal could cut. The old man's finally gone. The whispered words sliced through the somber atmosphere. Now we can move forward with our plans. I froze, my hand still resting on the polished wood of Dad's casket. The voice belonged to my husband Ryan, and it came from just around the corner. I shouldn't have been able to hear him, but the funeral home's perfect acoustics carried every word. "Patience, darling." That was Susan, my mother-in-law. "We need to handle this delicately. Amy's still too emotional to see reason. She'll never agree to sell." Ryan's voice hardened. Jack made sure of that, filling her head with all that legacy nonsense. I pressed my fingernails into my palms, fighting the urge to storm around that corner and confront them. Instead, I forced myself to stay still, to listen. "Then we'll have to be creative," Susan purred. "The company's board already supports our vision. It's just a matter of time before we can push her out completely." My father's face smiled up at me from the photo beside his casket, that familiar crooked grin that always meant he was up to something. The same smile he wore when he told me I'd inherit his position as CEO, not my older brother Mark, not my husband Ryan. "Trust your gut, kitten," he'd said. "The vultures will circle when I'm gone." "What about Mark?" Ryan asked. "He's been sniffing around for a piece of the action." Susan's laugh was cold. "Your brother-in-law is desperate enough to dance to any tune we play. Don't worry about him." The funeral director's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and their conversation abruptly ceased. I quickly wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were falling and straightened my black dress. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The funeral director touched my elbow gently. "The guests are starting to arrive." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Ryan appeared moments later, his face a perfect mask of grief as he wrapped an arm around my waist. The gesture that once brought comfort now made my skin crawl. "How are you holding up, honey?" he asked, his concern so convincing it would have fooled anyone who hadn't just heard him plotting with his mother. "I miss him," I said simply, the truth of those words burning in my throat. The funeral home filled quickly. I watched as Susan worked the room, her designer black dress and perfectly coiffed hair making her look more like she was attending a business meeting than a funeral. My brother Mark skulked near the back, already loosening his tie, probably counting the minutes until he could hit the nearest bar. Emily, my best friend, appeared at my side. "You look pale," she whispered. "Do you need some air?" I shook my head. "I need to stay strong for Dad." Jack Bennett was a visionary. Ryan began his eulogy, his voice carrying across the room. He built Bennett Technologies from nothing, through sheer determination and innovation. I watched him speak, seeing him clearly for the first time. The way his hands moved with practiced precision, how his voice caught at just the right moments. It was all calculated, rehearsed. How many times had he practiced this speech, waiting for this day? Dad's words echoed in my mind again. "Trust your gut, kitten." Well, my gut was screaming now, and it had never been wrong. As Ryan continued his performance, I made a silent promise to my father. They wanted a war. They'd get one. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. The lilies continued their suffocating dance around us, but now their sweetness felt different. Less like death, more like revenge. The first board meeting after Dad's funeral felt like walking into a snake pit. I arrived early, settling into his old chair at the head of the conference table. My fingers traced the worn leather armrests, remembering how he'd drum his fingers here when he was thinking. Ryan strode in, followed by his mother. They both faltered slightly at seeing me in Dad's chair. Susan recovered first, her red lips curving into what might have passed for a smile. "Amy, darling, perhaps you'd be more comfortable sitting in your usual spot." She gestured to my old seat, 3 chairs down. "I'm perfectly comfortable here, Susan." I met her gaze steadily. "As CEO, this is where I belong." The other board members filtered in, their whispered conversations dying as they noticed the tension. My brother Mark was the last to arrive, looking hungover and irritated. He slumped into a chair near the door, as far from me as possible. "Let's begin," I said, opening the folder in front of me. First item, the proposed sale of our medical technologies division. A necessary streamlining, Ryan jumped in, exactly as I'd expected. The division's been underperforming. Interesting. I slid copies of a report across the table, because these numbers tell a very different story. The board members leafed through the pages. Susan's perfectly manicured nails dug into her copy. "Where did you get these figures?" she demanded. "From Dad's private files. He kept detailed records of everything." I turned to the board. The division isn't underperforming. Its profits are being deliberately redirected through a series of shell companies. Mark sat up straighter, his bloodshot eyes suddenly alert. Ryan's hand twitched toward his water glass but stopped halfway. "That's a serious accusation," one of the board members said. "It's also completely false," Susan cut in. "These numbers could easily be manipulated. Jack was unwell in his final months." The words hit like a slap. Dad was sharp until the end, sharp enough to see what was happening to his company. "Amy." Ryan's voice carried that patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being difficult. "You're grieving. Perhaps we should table this discussion. Perhaps you should explain why $3 million disappeared into accounts connected to Mitchell Industries last quarter." I watched the color drain from his face. "That is your mother's company, isn't it?" The room erupted into chaos. Board members demanded explanations. Susan's face hardened into a mask of fury. "And Mark started laughing. "Oh, this is rich," he said, drawing everyone's attention. "Little Amy, Daddy's perfect princess, finally showing some teeth. You knew about this?" I asked him. He shrugged. "I knew something was going on. Ryan offered me a cut to keep quiet. Better than what Dad left me." "That's enough." Susan stood, her chair scraping back. "These accusations are groundless. The board will investigate," I interrupted, "unless you'd prefer I take this directly to the SEC. Ryan grabbed my arm as I left the meeting. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "This company needs—" I yanked free. "This company needs to be protected from people like you." "People like me?" His laugh was bitter. "I've given everything to this company while you played at being Daddy's little girl. You think you can run this alone?" "I think I'd rather burn it to the ground than let you and your mother steal it." His face changed then, something dark passing behind his eyes. "Be careful what you wish for, Amy." I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing with purpose. In my office, I found Emily waiting with coffee and concern. "How bad?" she asked. "Worse than we thought." I sank into my chair. Mark's involved too. "And Ryan?" "Ryan—" I twisted my wedding ring, the diamond catching the light. "Ryan just declared war." Emily squeezed my shoulder. "What's your next move?" I opened my laptop, pulling up a folder labeled Insurance. Dad had taught me to always keep evidence of everything, just in case. "Now," I said, "we follow the money." 3 days of digging through financial records had given me a migraine and a revelation I wasn't prepared for. The numbers on my screen blurred as I stared at the transaction history. Dad's signature, authorizing transfers to Mitchell Industries, appeared on documents dated after his stroke, when he could barely hold a pen. My office door clicked open. "I brought you dinner," Emily said, setting down a takeout bag, "and something else you should see." She handed me a USB drive. "Where did you get this?" "Mark dropped it off. He was drunk, said something about clearing his conscience." I plugged it in, my hands shaking slightly. Video files populated the screen, security footage from Dad's private office. I clicked on one dated 2 months before his death. The footage showed Ryan and Susan entering Dad's office late at night. Dad was there, slumped in his chair, barely conscious. Ryan positioned Dad's hand over documents while Susan guided the pen. "Son of a bitch," I whispered. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Meet me at Murphy's. Need to talk. Emily grabbed my arm. It's probably a trap. Probably. I grabbed my coat anyway. But he's the weak link. If I can get him to flip on them. Murphy's was a dive bar where Mark spent most of his evenings. He sat in a corner booth, nursing what looked like whiskey. His hands trembled as he lifted the glass. They're going to kill me, he said as I sat down. What? Susan knows I took the footage. He drained his glass. She called an hour ago, said accidents happen all the time. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of manipulation. His fear seemed genuine. Why did you take it? Because Dad knew. Mark's voice cracked. He knew what they were doing, but the stroke. He couldn't stop them. He tried to tell me, but I was too drunk, too stupid to understand until it was too late. A shadow fell across our table. Ryan stood there, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. Family reunion? How touching. Mark flinched. I kept my voice steady. Join us. We were just discussing forgery and elder abuse. Careful, Amy. Ryan slid into the booth beside me, too close. You're playing a dangerous game. Is that a threat? A warning. Mother's patience is wearing thin. His hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt. She's prepared to take more aggressive steps. Like what happened to Dad? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Ryan's grip tightened. What are you implying? His stroke was awfully convenient timing. Mark made a choking sound. Ryan's face went completely still. You should go home, Ryan said softly. Get some rest. You're not thinking clearly. I pulled my hand free. I'm thinking more clearly than ever. As I stood, Ryan caught my wrist. Don't make me choose between you and my mother, Amy. You won't like the outcome. You made that choice a long time ago. I turned to Mark. Coming. Mark looked between us, terror and indecision warring on his face. Then he stood on shaky legs. Yeah, I'm coming. Outside, Mark grabbed my shoulder. Amy, there's more. The medical division, it's not just about the money. They're hiding something in the research files. Something big. What? I started to ask, but headlights suddenly flooded the parking lot. A black SUV accelerated toward us. I shoved Mark hard, sending us both sprawling as the vehicle missed us by inches. It screeched around the corner and disappeared. Mark helped me up, his face ashen. Jesus Christ. My phone buzzed, a text from Susan. Last warning, walk away. I showed it to Mark. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. What are we going to do? We're going to find whatever they're hiding in those research files. I brushed gravel from my clothes, anger burning away my fear. And then we're going to burn their whole world down. Breaking into Dad's private lab at midnight wasn't how I'd planned to spend my evening, but Mark's trembling hands on the keypad told me we were close to something big. The medical division's research wing stood silent, our footsteps echoing through empty corridors. Dad changed all the passwords before his stroke, Mark whispered, trying another combination. He was paranoid about something. Since when did you care about Dad's concerns? The words came out sharper than intended. Mark's fingers paused over the keypad. I deserved that. But Amy, what I saw in those research files, it wasn't just about money laundering. The door clicked open. Dad's lab looked exactly as he'd left it. Organized chaos of papers, test tubes, and computer screens. I moved to his main workstation while Mark rifled through filing cabinets. Here. Mark's voice cracked. He held up a red folder labeled Project Phoenix. This is what Susan's been looking for. I opened the file. Medical trial data, genetic sequences, and a list of test subjects. My stomach turned as I read further. They were experimenting on patients without consent. Worse. Mark pointed to a notation. Look who signed off on it. Ryan's signature dated 3 years ago. Before Dad's stroke. Before everything fell apart. A noise in the corridor made us freeze. Footsteps approached, accompanied by voices. Check everything again, Susan's voice carried through the door. Those files have to be here somewhere. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a large storage unit. The door opened, and Susan entered with two men I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mitchell," one man said, "if these trials become public—" "They won't." Susan's heels clicked across the floor. "Once we have the documentation, there will be nothing to trace back to us. The new trials can proceed as planned. And your daughter-in-law?" "Amy's becoming a liability. Like her father, she doesn't understand that progress requires sacrifice." My blood ran cold. Mark's grip on my arm tightened. "What about the brother?" Susan's laugh was brittle. "Mark's a drunk. No one will believe him. Though after tonight's little accident, that won't be an issue." They moved deeper into the lab. Mark tugged my sleeve, pointing to the door. We had seconds to escape. As we crept toward the exit, my phone buzzed. The sound, though muffled, seemed deafening in the quiet lab. "What was that?" Susan demanded. We ran. Behind us, shouts erupted. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead as footsteps pounded after us. We burst through the emergency exit, alarms blaring. In the parking lot, headlights suddenly blazed to life. A car engine roared. Mark shoved me aside as a vehicle accelerated toward us. I hit the ground hard, the red folder scattering across the pavement. Through dazed eyes, I saw Ryan behind the wheel. "Amy!" Mark's scream cut through the chaos. He lay crumpled near a concrete barrier, not moving. I scrambled toward him, but hands grabbed me from behind. One of Susan's men dragged me backward while Ryan stepped out of the car. "I told you to stay out of it," he said, his voice hollow. "Why couldn't you just trust me?" "Trust you?" I fought against the grip on my arms. "Like Dad trusted you with those trials." Something flickered in Ryan's eyes. "You don't understand. We're trying to help people. By experimenting on them without consent. By killing my father when he found out." "Your father had a stroke," Susan said, approaching with the scattered papers. "A tragic, natural occurrence." "Nothing natural about it," Mark groaned, struggling to sit up. "I found the toxicology report." Susan's carefully composed face cracked. "Finish this," she ordered the men. "Make it look like an accident. Like brother and sister had a tragic late-night lab mishap." Ryan stepped forward. "Mother, wait." "Choose, Ryan. Now." I met my husband's eyes, seeing the wall behind them. In that moment, I realized how completely I'd misread everything. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about something far darker, and I was running out of time to expose it. The hospital corridor seemed endless as I limped toward Mark's room, my ribs screaming with every step. Emily walked beside me, her hand hovering near my elbow. "The police think it was a break-in gone wrong," she said. "They're not looking deeper." "Of course not." I stopped at Mark's door, watching him through the window. He lay still, tubes snaking from his arms, machines beeping steadily. Susan's got them in her pocket too. The door opened, and Ryan stepped out. We locked eyes, neither of us moving. The bruise on his jaw had darkened since last night, when he'd stepped between his mother's men and me. "He's stable," Ryan said quietly. "No permanent damage." "Unlike Dad." The words tasted like acid. Ryan glanced at Emily, then back to me. "We need to talk, alone. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of her." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "The trials weren't supposed to hurt anyone. They were meant to help people, terminal patients, people without options. By poisoning them, by testing experimental treatments." His voice cracked. "Your father understood that in the beginning. He helped design the protocols." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Emily steadied me as Ryan continued. "But when the side effects started showing up, Jack wanted to stop everything. Mother, she couldn't accept that. The potential profits were too high." A nurse passed by, giving us a curious look. Ryan lowered his voice. "She arranged for your father to receive small doses of the compound, just enough to cause a stroke. I didn't know until after—" My hands shook as I reached into my pocket, pulling out a USB drive. "Mark managed to grab this before everything went dark last night. Want to know what's on it?" Ryan's face paled. "Amy. Videos of every board meeting where you and Susan discussed the trials. Dad recorded everything. I stepped closer, including the night you both visited his office after his stroke. If those files go public, hundreds of people will lose their jobs. The company will collapse. Maybe it should. He grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. Think about what you're doing. There are other trials happening right now. Patients who need to be guinea pigs. I yanked free. How many have died already, Ryan? The elevator dinged, and Susan stepped out, immaculate as always. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of us. Darling, she called to Ryan, the board's emergency meeting starts in 20 minutes. Ryan straightened, his face settling into that familiar mask. Coming, Mother. As he walked away, I called after him. You have to choose, Ryan. This time for real. He paused but didn't turn around. Susan smiled at me, all teeth and warning. Family dinner tonight, dear. We have so much to discuss. After they left, Emily squeezed my shoulder. You're not actually going, are you? I watched their retreating figures. Dad's private server backs up automatically every night at midnight. In 3 hours, everything on this drive goes public unless I stop it. They'll kill you. Maybe. I touched the window of Mark's room. Or maybe it's time someone showed them what real family loyalty looks like. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Your father's original research, parking level B, 1 hour, come alone. Emily read it over my shoulder. It's a trap. Probably. I straightened despite the pain. But it's also the only chance we have of understanding what they're really doing with those trials. Amy, I need you to do something for me. I handed her an envelope. If I'm not back in 2 hours, send this to every major news outlet. It's everything we have so far, plus Dad's personal notes. She clutched the envelope, tears in her eyes. What happened to simple corporate revenge? This stopped being simple the moment they killed Dad. I checked my watch. 1 hour to find the truth, then either way, it all comes crashing down. I started toward the elevator, each step more certain than the last. Behind me, the steady beep of Mark's heart monitor echoed like a countdown. Parking level B smelled like stale oil and secrets. My footsteps echoed as I approached the meeting spot, every shadow holding potential threats. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, its contents a digital time bomb set to detonate in less than 2 hours. A figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar. Not Ryan or Susan, but Dr. Chen, Dad's head researcher who'd disappeared 6 months ago. Miss Bennett. His face was gaunt, eyes darting nervously. I didn't think you'd come. You have my father's research. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. Everything. The original trials, the real results, and... A gunshot cracked through the garage. Chen jerked forward, red blooming across his chest. I dove behind a car as more shots rang out. Chen lay motionless, the envelope scattered across the concrete. Really, Amy? Susan's voice carried across the garage. Did you think we wouldn't monitor Chen? I crawled toward the nearest papers, gathering what I could reach. Footsteps approached from multiple directions. It's over, dear. Susan stepped into view, flanked by her security team. Ryan stood slightly behind her, his face unreadable. The board has already voted. You've been removed as CEO. Using forged documents? I clutched the papers to my chest, like the ones you used to kill my father. Your father was weak. Susan's heels clicked against concrete as she moved closer. He would have destroyed everything we built, just like you're trying to do now. What you built was murder. I rose slowly, backing toward the exit. Those trial patients were terminal anyway. She waved dismissively. Their deaths advanced medical science. Your father understood that once. Until he discovered you were targeting healthy people too. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. Everything's uploading to a secure server right now. In 90 minutes, it all goes public. Susan's composed mask cracked slightly. Ryan, handle this. Ryan stepped forward, hand extended. Give me the phone, Amy. Choose, Ryan. My voice shook. Right here, right now. He moved closer, speaking softly. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand everything. I backed away. Dad trusted you. I trusted you. And I trusted you. His calm facade shattered. But you never saw me, did you? Just Dad's perfect successor, while I was nothing but the convenient marriage alliance. That's not enough. Susan nodded to her men. Get the phone and the papers. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong, like her brother. Ryan's eyes widened. Mother, wait, I ran. Bullets pinged off cars around me as I zigzagged toward the exit. A sharp pain exploded in my shoulder, spinning me into a concrete pillar. The papers scattered, staining red. Through blurring vision, I saw Ryan arguing with Susan, then running toward me. Behind him, Susan raised her own gun. No, I tried to shout, but my voice came out weak. The shot echoed. Ryan stumbled, looking surprised. Susan lowered her weapon as he collapsed. Disappointing, she said, stepping over him. You both were always so disappointingly sentimental. My phone lay just out of reach, screen cracked but still counting down. 78 minutes until everything uploaded. Your father had the same look, Susan mused, standing over me. Right before his stroke, that mixture of betrayal and righteousness. She aimed the gun. At least you'll die knowing you tried. A security alarm blared suddenly. Emergency lights started flashing. Ma'am, one of her men called urgently. Police are entering the building. Susan's face contorted with rage. How? Emily, I managed to whisper. She had a backup plan. Sirens wailed in the distance. Susan's men melted away into the shadows, leaving her alone. This isn't over, she hissed, backing away. Some wars take generations to win. I dragged myself toward Ryan's motionless form as Susan's footsteps faded. My vision darkened at the edges, but I forced myself to stay conscious. The phone screen flickered, 65 minutes remaining. In the growing darkness, I reached for Ryan's hand, feeling for a pulse, wondering if revenge was worth the cost of becoming just like those we sought to destroy. The hospital room felt too small for all our ghosts. Ryan lay pale against white sheets, tubes snaking from his arms, while Mark watched from his wheelchair by the window. 30 minutes remained on the upload countdown. She won't stop, Ryan whispered, his voice rough. Even after shooting her own son, I touched the bandage on my shoulder. Where would she go? The lab. His fingers found mine, weak but urgent. There's a hidden server room. Everything's backed up there. Every trial, every death. Mark wheeled closer, including Dad's. Everything. Ryan's monitors beeped faster. She'll destroy it all before the police arrive. I checked my phone. 28 minutes. Then we end this now. Amy, Ryan's grip tightened. The keycard in my wallet. It'll get you in, but, he coughed, face contorting. She's waiting for you. The laboratory building loomed dark against the night sky. Emergency lights cast red shadows through empty corridors as I approached the hidden entrance Ryan had described. Mark's voice crackled through my earpiece, monitoring security feeds from his hospital room. 2 guards at the server room door, he said. Susan's inside. I swiped Ryan's keycard. The panel glowed green. Amy. Mark's voice softened. Dad would say this isn't worth dying for. Dad died for this. I stepped inside. We're just finishing what he started. The guards turned at my approach. I held up Ryan's keycard. Susan's expecting me. They exchanged glances, then stepped aside. Inside, servers hummed like mechanical insects. Susan stood at a central console, her elegant suit incongruous among the blinking lights. I wondered when you'd arrive. She didn't look up from the keyboard. Though I expected you sooner. Getting sentimental with Ryan? It's over, Susan. The police are on their way. It's never over. Her fingers flew across keys. You think exposing the trials will change anything? There will always be progress to be made, sacrifices required. Like sacrificing your own son? Her hand stilled. Ryan made his choice. No. I moved closer. You made all his choices, just like you chose to murder my father. Jack was weak. She spun to face me. He would have destroyed decades of research over a few unfortunate deaths. Everything I've built. You built nothing. I pulled out my phone, showing the countdown, 12 minutes. Dad built this company. You just corrupted it. She drew her gun with surprising speed. Delete the upload, now. Or what? You'll kill me too. I stepped forward. Go ahead. In 11 minutes, everyone will know what you did. How many board members will stand with you then? You stupid girl. She aimed at my heart. You're just like your father, so caught up in morality that you can't see the bigger picture. I see it perfectly. I took another step. I see a woman so obsessed with power she'd kill her own son to keep it. The gun wavered. Behind her, a shadow moved. Mark, wheeling silently through the back entrance Ryan had told us about. Last chance, Susan said. Delete it. Like you deleted those trial patients. Like you deleted my father. She pulled the trigger. The gun clicked empty. Looking for these? Mark held up a handful of bullets. Ryan said you never checked the clip twice. Susan lunged for the console, but I was faster. We grappled, her manicured nails raking my face as we crashed into servers. Warning lights flashed as equipment toppled. It's done, Mark called out. Police just entered the building. Susan went still. You're all fools, she whispered. The world needs people like me, people willing to do what's necessary. The world needs truth. I stood, watching the upload counter hit 0. Dad taught me that. As police swarmed the room, Susan straightened her jacket with dignity, but her eyes held something I'd never seen before. Fear. My phone buzzed, a text from Ryan. Did we get her? I watched as officers led Susan away, her empire crumbling with each step. We got justice, I typed back. Dad would be proud of both of us. The server room's emergency lights painted everything in shades of red, like blood, like revenge, like dawn breaking after the longest night. Dad's garden bloomed with autumn colors as I knelt beside his favorite rose bush, pruning shears in hand. The morning paper lay beside me, its headline still surreal. Mitchell Industries CEO sentenced in medical trial deaths. The back door creaked. Mark wheeled himself onto the patio, 2 coffee cups balanced on his lap. His recovery was slow, but steady. Board meeting in an hour, he said, offering me a cup. You ready? I snipped a withered stem. Just needed to clear my head first. Dad always said the garden was the best place to think. Mark watched a fallen leaf spiral down. Remember how he'd make us help him weed before making any big decisions? I remember you complaining about it constantly. Yeah, well, he shifted in his chair. I was wrong about a lot of things. The morning sun caught my wedding ring, still on my finger despite everything. Ryan's trial was next week, separate from his mother's, thanks to his cooperation. The prosecutors called it a deal. I called it his first real choice. Emily found something in the old research files, I said, pruning another dead branch. Looks like Dad was working on something before everything happened, a legitimate treatment protocol. Let me guess, you want to restart the project? I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. Properly this time. Legal trials, full disclosure, everything documented. Using Mom's settlement money. A hint of the old bitterness crept into his voice. Using all of it. I faced him. But I need a partner, someone to keep me honest, challenge my decisions. Mark's eyes widened slightly. Amy. Dad wanted both of us involved, Mark. He just didn't know how to fix what was broken between us. And you think you do? I think we both learned the hard way what happens when family turns against family. I picked up the newspaper, Susan's mugshot staring back at us. Maybe it's time we learned how to be on the same side. He was quiet for a long moment, then reached for the pruning shears. I handed them over, watching as he carefully trimmed a struggling branch. The garden needs work, he said finally. Lot of dead weight to clear out. That's what fresh starts are for. Inside, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Signed the divorce papers. Hope you find what Dad saw in the research. Take care of yourself, Amy. Mark cleared his throat. We should head in. Board's waiting. I gathered the gardening tools, pausing at Dad's favorite roses. They weren't perfect, some stems twisted, others scarred, but they were growing stronger, reaching for light despite everything they'd endured. You know, Mark said as we headed inside, Dad used to say revenge was like pruning. Cut too deep, you kill the whole plant. Cut just right, and you make room for new growth. I closed the garden gate behind us. Took me a while to understand what he meant. In my office, Dad's old nameplate sat on my desk beside a new one. Bennett Technologies, Amy and Mark Bennett, co-CEOs. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows behind us as we headed to the boardroom. Not all shadows were gone. Some wounds would take time to heal. Some trust might never fully return. But as Mark and I entered the room together, I felt something Dad had tried to teach us all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction. The board members rose as we entered, their faces expectant. I took my seat, not at the head of the table where Dad once sat, but beside Mark, where we could face whatever came next as equals. "Shall we begin?" I asked, opening the folder marked Project Phoenix. Mark nodded, and for a moment I swore I saw Dad's smile in his face. Let's build something worth keeping this time.
My name is Tasha, and 5 years ago, I married Tom, thinking we shared the same dreams and ambitions. We moved into my luxury apartment on the top floor of a high-rise building, with a view that took my breath away every time I looked out the window. I worked as the head of the financial department in a trading company, and my career was on a steep upward trajectory. Tom's mother, Linda, lived nearby and visited us often. From the beginning, she made it clear that she didn't approve of my career-oriented lifestyle. "A woman's place is in the home," she'd say, her lips pursed in disapproval. "You should be taking care of your husband, not gallivanting off to work every day." I tried to keep the peace, smiling and nodding when Linda went on her tirades about the duties of a good wife. But inside, I was seething. I had made it clear to Tom from the start that I wanted to build my career before settling down to have children. He had agreed then, but as time went on, I could see him wavering under his mother's influence. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Tom and Linda sitting at our dining table, heads close together in conversation. They fell silent as soon as I walked in, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Tasha," Tom said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I dropped my bag and sat down, my heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Linda spoke up first. "Tasha, dear, we're worried about you. All this work, it's not healthy. You're neglecting your home, your husband. When are you going to start thinking about having children?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Linda, Tom and I have discussed this. We agreed that we'd focus on our careers first, then think about starting a family." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Tasha, maybe it's time to reconsider. We're not getting any younger, and Mom's right. The apartment's a mess, and I'm tired of eating takeout every night." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tom, are you serious? We talked about this. You know how important my job is to me. More important than your family?" Linda interjected, her voice sharp. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "My job is how I'm building a future for our family." "I thought you understood that, Tom." I stormed out of the room, locking myself in our bedroom. As I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of my troubles. Little did I know how right I was. The next morning, I left for work before Tom woke up. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone, not even my husband, derail my ambitions. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't about to give it all up now. I arrived at the office earlier than usual and stayed late into the night, determined to prove my worth. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. A few hours later, my secretary buzzed me. "Mrs. Thompson, the president would like to see you in his office." My heart raced as I made my way to the top floor. Mr. Johnson, our company president, was known for his shrewd business acumen and his tendency to spring surprises on his employees. "Tasha, come in," he said as I knocked on his door. "Have a seat." I perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I've been watching your work closely," Mr. Johnson began, his face unreadable. "And I must say, I'm impressed." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We're expanding, Tasha. Merging with a large company from another city. It's a big move, and we need our best people on it." My pulse quickened. Was this going where I thought it was? "I'm planning to promote you," he continued. "Head of a new department. But I won't lie to you, Tasha. It's going to be tough. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked before. Are you up for it?" I thought about Tom and Linda, about their expectations of me. Then I thought about all the late nights I'd spent poring over financial reports, the satisfaction I felt when a project came together perfectly. "Absolutely, sir," I said firmly. "And I accept. I won't let you down." As I left Mr. Johnson's office, I felt like I was walking on air. This was what I'd been working towards all these years. I couldn't wait to share the news with Tom. Surely, when he saw how successful I was becoming, he'd understand why my career was so important to me. On my way home, I stopped at our favorite restaurant and ordered all of Tom's favorite dishes. I picked up a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of roses. This was cause for celebration, and I was determined to make it special. I juggled the bags as I unlocked our apartment door. "Tom?" I called out. "I'm home, and I've got a surprise." I found him in the living room, sprawled on the couch, the TV blaring. He barely looked up as I entered. "Tom, you won't believe what happened today," I said, my excitement bubbling over. "I'm getting promoted. Head of a new department. Isn't that amazing?" Tom muted the TV and turned to face me, his expression far from the joy I'd expected. "So, you'll be working even more now, is that it?" I felt my smile falter. "Well, yes, but think about what this means for us. We'll be able to afford that big house we've always talked about. Regular trips around the world. Our future is set." Tom stood up abruptly. "Our future? What future, Tasha? You're never home as it is. When was the last time we had dinner together? When was the last time we even had a real conversation?" I gestured helplessly at the bags I'd brought home. "That's why I brought dinner. I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Tom's voice rose. "Celebrate you abandoning our marriage for your job? Celebrate the fact that I married a woman who cares more about her career than having a family?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I thought you'd be happy for me," I whispered. Tom's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "I can't do this anymore, Tasha. Something has to change." With that, he stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by the trappings of the celebration that would never happen, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. As I mechanically put away the food and poured myself a glass of champagne, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the price of success? And if it was I willing to pay it? One evening, as I was leaving the office, I had an idea. I'd hire a housekeeper. Someone to clean the apartment and cook meals. It would solve Tom's complaints about the messy apartment and lack of home-cooked food. Satisfied with my solution, I made the necessary arrangements. 2 weeks later, I came home to find the apartment spotless, the air filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal. I smiled to myself, certain that Tom would be pleased. I heard the front door open and close. "Tom?" I called out. "I'm home. And dinner's ready." He walked into the kitchen, his eyes darting around the clean space. "What's all this?" "I hired a housekeeper," I explained, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. "She cleans and cooks. I thought it would make things easier for both of us." Instead of the gratitude I expected, Tom's face clouded over. So, this is your solution? Hire someone else to do your job? That's not fair, I protested. I'm trying to find a balance. Balance? Tom laughed bitterly. Is that what you call this? Tell me, Tasha, now that you've found a replacement for yourself in the kitchen, are you going to find a replacement for yourself in our bed too? I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. How dare you, I hissed. I've done nothing but try to make our life better, and this is how you react. Tom turned away. I'm going out. Don't wait up. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the immaculate kitchen, the untouched dinner growing cold on the table. Over the next few days, Tom and I barely spoke. I buried myself in work, focusing on the upcoming merger. It was easier to deal with spreadsheets and financial projections than the mess my personal life had become. Then, one rare Saturday when I didn't have to go into the office, I decided to make an effort. I spent the morning cooking Tom's favorite meals, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our last anniversary. When Tom came home, I was waiting with a smile. I thought we could have a nice dinner together, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Just the two of us. Tom looked at me for a long moment, then nodded silently. My heart leapt. Maybe this was the turning point we needed. I was just about to serve the appetizer when the doorbell rang. Confused, I went to answer it. There, standing in the hallway, was Linda. Linda, I said, unable to keep the surprise out of my voice. We weren't expecting you. Oh, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by, she said, pushing past me into the apartment. Tom, darling, there you are. I watched in dismay as my carefully planned romantic dinner turned into an impromptu family gathering. Linda dominated the conversation, peppering her small talk with not-so-subtle digs at my housekeeping and lack of maternal instincts. You know, she said, helping herself to more wine. In my day, a woman knew her place was in the home. We took pride in taking care of our husbands, raising our children. I stood up abruptly. I think it's time for dessert, I said, fleeing to the kitchen. As I leaned against the counter, trying to regain my composure, I could hear Linda's voice drifting in from the dining room. Tom, darling, you need to talk some sense into her. A woman's duty is to her family first. Everything else is secondary. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would be. I had a successful career, a beautiful home, but at what cost? As I listened to Linda's continued lecture on the virtues of traditional family values, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a terrible mistake somewhere along the way. One evening, I came home later than usual, my mind still buzzing with the day's meetings. As I opened the door to our apartment, I froze. There, scattered across the living room floor, were baby clothes. Tiny onesies, miniature socks, even a small pair of shoes. Tom? I called out, my voice wavering. What's all this? He emerged from the bedroom, a strange look on his face. Oh, Mom brought those over. She thought it might help you get in the mood. I picked up a small t-shirt, my fingers trembling. In the mood for what, exactly? For starting a family, of course, Tom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Tasha, we're not getting any younger. It's time we seriously considered having children. I spent the rest of the evening silently putting away the baby clothes, my mind in turmoil. Was I being selfish? Was my ambition destroying my marriage? The next morning, I woke up to find more baby items strategically placed around the apartment. A rattle on the coffee table, a baby book on my nightstand, a high chair in the kitchen. Linda's handiwork, no doubt. I tried to ignore them, but they seemed to multiply. Every day, there was something new. It was as if the apartment was slowly transforming into a nursery, whether I wanted it to or not. One night, I came home to find Linda sitting on our couch, flipping through a parenting magazine. Linda, I said, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. I didn't know you were coming over. She looked up, a saccharine smile on her face. "Oh, Tasha, dear. I hope you don't mind. Tom said I could wait for him here. He's just popped out to get some groceries." I nodded stiffly, heading to the bedroom to change. When I came back out, Linda was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You know, Tasha," she said, not turning around. "A view like this is wasted on just two people. Imagine how lovely it would be to have a child toddle up to this window, their little hands pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder." I felt a headache coming on. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but Tom and I will decide when we're ready for children." She turned to face me, her eyes hard. "And when will that be, Tasha? When you've worked yourself into an early grave? When it's too late?" I opened my mouth to argue, but at that moment, Tom walked in, arms full of grocery bags. He looked between us, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" he asked cautiously. Linda's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, everything's fine, darling. I was just having a little chat with Tasha about family planning." Tom's eyes lit up. "Really? That's great. I knew you'd come around, Tasha." I felt cornered, outnumbered. I need some air," I mumbled, grabbing my coat and rushing out of the apartment. A few weeks later, I stumbled through the front door, exhausted from another long day at work. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. There, padding around our living room in fluffy pink pajamas, was Linda. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Tom emerged from the kitchen, a defiant look on his face. "I've decided that Mom is going to live with us. You're always at work, always away from home. I'm tired of being alone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You decided? Without even discussing it with me? When are you ever here to discuss anything?" Tom shot back. I turned to Linda, who was watching our exchange with a smug smile. "You can't stay here. This is my home." Tom's face darkened. "If you're not happy with this arrangement, you can get out." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me? I bought this apartment before we even got married. It's registered in my name. You can't kick me out of my own home." Linda stood up, her face twisted with anger. She took a threatening step towards me. "Now listen here, you ungrateful." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't come any closer, Linda. If you lay a hand on me, I'll call the police." Linda's face crumpled. She collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her chest dramatically. "Oh, Tom," she wailed. "Did you hear that? She threatened to call the police on me." "Your own wife, threatening your mother? Oh, how she's hardened. That awful job of hers has turned her into a monster." Tom rushed to his mother's side, shooting me a venomous look. "How could you, Tasha? Your own mother-in-law." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I stormed off to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me. I spent a restless night tossing and turning, my mind racing with the absurdity of the situation. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Mr. Johnson, my boss. "Tasha, I need you on a plane today," he said without preamble. "We're ready to move forward with the merger. I need you in Chicago ASAP. I've never packed so quickly in my life." As I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, I was met with the stony faces of Tom and Linda. "I have to go on a business trip," I said, my voice cold. "It's for the merger. I'll be back soon." Tom's lip curled. "Don't bother coming back at all." The flight to Chicago was a blur. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. The merger negotiations were intense, requiring all of my focus and energy. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone in my hotel room, the reality of my situation came crashing down. After a grueling week of negotiations and sleepless nights, I finally returned home. As I stood outside my apartment door, suitcases at my feet, I felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. I just wanted to collapse into my own bed and forget about the world for a while. I inserted my key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again. Nothing. A cold feeling of dread washed over me as I realized what must have happened. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. After a moment, it swung open. There stood Tom and Linda, both wearing casual house clothes, looking at me with a mixture of smugness and disdain. "Why doesn't my key work?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom let out a harsh laugh. "I changed the locks," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "You can come in if you're ready to choose your family over your precious career." I stood there, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. With a flourish, he presented them to me. "Divorce papers," he said. "It's time to choose, Tasha. Your career or your home. What's it going to be?" I looked at Tom, really looked at him, and in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't love him anymore. The man I had married was gone, replaced by this bitter, manipulative stranger. Linda's shrill voice cut through my thoughts. "Well, we're waiting. Make your choice." I took a deep breath, straightening my spine. "I choose my career," I said, my voice steady. "Because I don't have a family or a husband. Not anymore." Tom's face twisted with anger, but he thrust a pen at me. With a steady hand, I signed the divorce papers right there in the hallway. As soon as I finished, Linda grabbed my arm and roughly pushed me towards the elevator. "Good riddance," she spat, slamming the door behind me. I stood there, staring at the closed door of what used to be my home. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, bordering on hysterical. I had just been kicked out of my own apartment, the one I had bought with my hard-earned money. Too tired to make a scene, I gathered my suitcases and made my way to a nearby hotel. A few hours later, I received a call from my friend Rachel, a realtor I had worked with when buying the apartment. "Tasha, hon, how are you doing?" Rachel asked, concern evident in her voice. "I've been better," I admitted. "Why do you ask?" Rachel hesitated. "I've seen Tom's posts on social media. He's saying some pretty nasty things about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "He's calling you a soulless careerist who destroyed your family for the sake of your job. Says he sacrificed everything for your relationship and you just used him and tossed him aside. He's even talking about suing you for alimony. People are really sympathizing with him, Tasha." I felt a surge of anger. "That's not what happened at all." "I didn't think so," Rachel said. "Want to tell me your side?" I gave her a brief rundown of the events of the past week. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Oh, Tasha," she finally said. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. Listen, I'm going to set the record straight with our friends and colleagues. People need to know the truth." "Thanks, Rachel," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "I really appreciate that." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Tom's lies, gratitude for Rachel's support, and a growing determination. Tom might have taken my home for now, but I wasn't going to let him take my reputation or my dignity. The vibration of my phone startled me out of my thoughts. Mr. Johnson's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach dropped. I took a deep breath and answered. "Tasha, we need to talk," Mr. Johnson said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I've heard some concerning things on social media." I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. "Sir, I can explain dash." "No need to explain, Tasha," he interrupted. "I want to hear your side of the story." Relief washed over me. I took a deep breath and launched into the whole sordid tale, the arguments, Linda moving in, being locked out of my own apartment, and Tom's social media smear campaign. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, to my surprise, Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Tasha, do you really think I'd believe that nonsense your ex is spouting?" he said. "I know you. I've seen your dedication, your work ethic. Don't let this affect your confidence. You have every right to defend yourself, and I want you to know that the company stands behind you." Tears of relief pricked at my eyes. Thank you, sir. You don't know how much that means to me. A couple of days later, my phone pinged with a social media notification. Tom was doing a live broadcast from my apartment. Curious, I tapped on the video. There was Tom, grinning at the camera, surrounded by a film crew. Hey everyone! Exciting news, we're about to start a major renovation on our apartment. The crew from Extreme Makeover, Home Edition will be here in 2 weeks to transform this place. I stared at the screen, a plan forming in my mind. Instead of anger, I felt a sense of calm determination. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel's number. It's Tasha. I need a huge favor, I said the moment she answered. I need you to sell my apartment. Fast. Like, within 2 weeks fast. Rachel let out a low whistle. That's a tall order, Tasha. What's the rush? I quickly explained about Tom's renovation plans. I need new owners in there before that film crew arrives. But Tasha, how am I supposed to show the apartment? Tom changed the locks, remember? I sent her the most recent photos I had of the place. These will have to do. I know it's not ideal, but... Rachel cut me off with a laugh. Oh, honey, you underestimate me. I've got a couple who've been looking for exactly this kind of place in this area. They trust my judgment. With these photos and the reputation of the building, I think I can make this happen. 2 weeks flew by in a blur of work and anticipation. Before I knew it, the day of the big renovation reveal had arrived. I sat in my hotel room, laptop open, watching the live stream with bated breath. The camera panned across my former apartment, now filled with an excited film crew and construction workers. Tom and Linda stood in the center, beaming at the cameras. We're so excited to start this renovation, Tom was saying, his arm around Linda's shoulders. It's time for a fresh start, a new chapter in our lives. Just as the host was about to give the signal to start demolition, there was a commotion off camera. The door burst open, and in walked a smartly dressed couple, followed by a familiar face, Rachel. I'm sorry, but you can't renovate this apartment, the man said, holding up a stack of papers. It belongs to us now. The camera swung wildly as confusion erupted. Tom's face went from shock to anger. What are you talking about? This is my home. Rachel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Actually, Tom, this apartment belonged to your ex-wife, Tasha. She sold it to this lovely couple 2 weeks ago. Your signature on the renovation documents is a forgery. The host of the show turned to Tom, his face livid. You forged documents? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? Tom and Linda's faces turned a deep shade of red as the host continued to berate them on live television. The scandal unfolded in real time, with millions of viewers watching as Tom's lies came crashing down around him. I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. It was over. I had won. With the proceeds from the sale of the apartment, I made a bold move. I bought a charming little house in the city where our company had just completed its merger. It felt poetic, somehow a new home in the city where my career was taking off. To my delight, Mr. Johnson appointed me as the head of our newly acquired company. It was a challenge, but one I was more than ready for. Weeks later, I found myself face to face with Tom again, this time in a courtroom. He had the audacity to demand half of the proceeds from the apartment sale, plus alimony. I watched with satisfaction as the judge denied his claims, citing his attempt to unlawfully seize my property and the forged documents. As we left the courthouse, Tom approached me, his earlier bravado replaced by desperation. Tasha, please, he begged. I'm sorry for everything. Can't we start over? Give our marriage another chance? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of freedom. I laughed, not unkindly, but with finality. No, Tom, I said, shaking my head. We can't start over. But I can start anew, and that's exactly what I'm doing. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. My career was soaring. I was leading a successful merger, respected by my peers and superiors alike. I had a beautiful new home, one that was truly mine. My name is Erica, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down in ways I never could have imagined. For over a decade, I'd been happily married to my husband, James. We had what I thought was a rock-solid relationship built on trust and mutual respect. I worked as a remote French tutor, a job I enjoyed despite its modest pay. James came from a well-to-do family, but that never mattered to us. His parents, however, were a different story. Richard, my father-in-law, was an influential executive director at the local hospital. His wife, Margaret, busied herself with various charitable foundations. From the moment James introduced me, they made it clear they didn't approve of me. James had a brother, Michael, who was married to Emily. They had a 13-year-old daughter named Lily. Unable to have children of my own, I doted on my niece, often taking her for weekends and outings. Emily and I had become close over the years. During one of our coffee dates, she confided in me about the family's wealth. "Erica, you wouldn't believe the amount of property and money Richard and Margaret have given Michael and me," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "We're talking millions." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Millions? Where did they get that kind of money?" Emily shrugged. "I try not to think about it too much. But sometimes I joke that we're secret millionaires who can't touch our fortune." I laughed along, but a nagging feeling settled in my stomach. Something about the situation felt off, but I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on my family and my work. Life continued this way for years, a delicate balance of family dynamics and unspoken tensions. Then, tragedy struck. Michael and Emily were killed in a car accident, leaving Lily an orphan. The funeral was a somber affair, but something about Richard and Margaret's behavior struck me as odd. They seemed distracted, almost annoyed by the proceedings, as if they had more pressing matters on their minds than grieving their son. As we stood by the graveside, I overheard Margaret muttering to Richard, "We need to sort out the paperwork as soon as possible. This complicates everything." In the days that followed, I threw myself into caring for Lily. The poor girl was devastated, and I wanted to do everything I could to comfort her. After much discussion with James, I approached him with an idea. "Honey, what if we adopted Lily?" I suggested one evening. "She needs a stable home, and we love her so much already." James considered it for a moment before nodding. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's talk to my parents about it." The next day, James and I visited his parents' sprawling mansion to discuss our proposal to adopt Lily. As we sat in their opulent living room, I couldn't help but feel out of place among the antique furniture and priceless artworks. "Absolutely not," Margaret snapped as soon as we broached the subject. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at me. "Erica is not suitable to be a mother to our granddaughter. We will raise Lily ourselves." I was stunned by the vehemence in her voice. "But I've been a part of Lily's life since she was born," I protested. "James and I love her, and we can provide a stable home." Richard cleared his throat, his expression cold. "This isn't up for discussion. Lily stays with us." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "Besides, we all know what this is really about, don't we, Erica? You're just after Michael's money. How convenient that you can't have children of your own, and now you want to swoop in and become Lily's guardian. Did you think we wouldn't see through your little scheme?" As we left the house, I felt a mix of anger and sadness washing over me. "I can't believe they'd accuse me of something so horrible," I said to James as we drove home. He sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "I'm sorry, Erica. They're just protective of Lily. Give them time, they'll come around." But time didn't improve things. In fact, over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in James. He began staying late at work more often, always with some vague excuse about an important project. When he was home, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and exchanging messages with someone. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table in silence, I couldn't take it anymore. "James, is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." He looked up from his phone, his expression hard. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with," he snapped. I recoiled at his harsh tone. This wasn't like him at all. "I'm your wife," I said softly. "If something's bothering you, I want to help." "Just drop it, Erica," he growled, pushing away from the table and storming out of the room. Hurt and confused, I tried to focus on the one bright spot in my life, my relationship with Lily. I visited her at Richard and Margaret's house as often as I could, helping her with her French lessons and providing a sympathetic ear for her grief. One afternoon, as Lily and I sat in the sunroom working on her conjugations, I overheard Richard and Margaret arguing in the next room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself straining to hear their heated exchange. "We need to find a way to invalidate that trust fund," Richard hissed. $10 million, Margaret. $10 million that should be ours, not locked away for that girl. Margaret's voice was equally angry. "Don't you think I know that? I've got the lawyers working on it, but it's not going to be easy. Michael made sure everything was ironclad before he died." I felt my blood run cold. They were talking about Lily's inheritance, the money Michael and Emily had set aside for their daughter's future. And they wanted to take it for themselves. That evening, I rushed home, prepared to tell James everything I'd overheard. But as soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was terribly wrong. James was sitting in the living room, a stack of papers on the coffee table in front of him. "We need to talk, Erica," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I approached James cautiously, the urgency of what I'd overheard momentarily forgotten. "James, what's going on?" He didn't meet my eyes as he pushed the stack of papers towards me. "I want a divorce, Erica." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the sofa for support. "What? Why? James, I don't understand." James finally looked up at me, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "I've met someone else. She's beautiful, intelligent, and from a good family. Everything you're not." Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. A stunning brunette smiled back at me, her arm draped possessively over James's shoulder. They looked happy, intimate. "This is Amanda," James said. "We've been seeing each other for a while now. I need you to sign these and leave. Tonight." Tears blurred my vision as I mechanically signed where he indicated. I felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out my insides and left me an empty shell. "What about the house? Our stuff?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James waved dismissively. "We'll sort out the division of property later. I don't have time for that now. Just pack what you need for a few days and leave the rest." I nodded numbly and headed to our bedroom, no, his bedroom now, to pack a bag. As I threw clothes haphazardly into a suitcase, I heard the front door open. "James? Are you home, darling? Did you get rid of her?" It was Margaret's voice, sickly sweet in a way I'd never heard before. "Yes, Mom," James replied. "Erica's packing now. She'll be gone within the hour." Margaret clapped her hands together. "Excellent. You must bring Amanda to dinner tomorrow. Your father and I are dying to meet her properly." I retreated to the bedroom, feeling sick. How could they be so callous? So cruel? I finished packing in a daze, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Margaret was still there. She didn't bother to hide her triumphant smile. "Erica, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry things didn't work out between you and James. Besides, don't bother coming around to see Lily anymore. It's best if you make a clean break." With those final, cutting words ringing in my ears, I stepped out into the night. The door closed behind me with a finality that seemed to echo the end of my married life. I found myself at a nearby hotel, checking in for the night in a fog of disbelief and pain. As I lay in the impersonal hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to make sense of how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The next morning, operating on autopilot, I found a small apartment to rent. It was nothing like the home I'd shared with James, but it would do. I threw myself into my work, teaching French lessons online from morning till night, anything to keep my mind occupied. A week after moving into my new apartment, my phone rang. It was Lily. My heart leapt at the sound of her voice. "Aunt Erica," she said hesitantly. "Are you okay? Grandma said you and Uncle James split up." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm okay, sweetheart. These things happen sometimes. How are you doing?" As we chatted, Lily hesitantly told me about James bringing his new girlfriend to dinner. "She's pretty," Lily said. "But she's not as nice as you. I don't like her." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I changed the subject, asking about her school and her friends. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Lily seemed nervous, on edge. Over the next few weeks, I tried to establish a new normal. One evening, as I was grading papers, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Aunt Erica, I'm scared. Can we talk?" Alarmed, I immediately called her back. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Aunt Erica, weird things are happening here." "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, concern flooding through me. Lily hesitated before continuing. "There are always these strange people coming to the house. They argue with Grandpa and Grandma a lot. They talk about money and something called a trust fund. It sounds like Grandpa and Grandma owe them something." My blood ran cold as I remembered the conversation I'd overheard about Lily's inheritance. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Lily, honey, I want you to be very careful, okay? Don't let anyone know you're telling me this." "I won't," she promised. "I've been recording some of their conversations on my phone. And I kind of got into Grandpa's computer and copied some files." I was shocked by her resourcefulness. "Lily, that's very clever, but also very dangerous. You need to be careful." The next day, I received an email from Lily. It contained audio files, photos, and documents she'd managed to gather. With shaking hands, I began to go through the material. What I discovered left me reeling. The audio recordings captured heated arguments between Richard and various individuals, all demanding repayment of large sums of money. The photos showed clandestine meetings in dimly lit rooms, with Richard handing over envelopes to shady-looking characters. But it was the documents that truly horrified me. Spreadsheets detailing the production and distribution of counterfeit medicines. Falsified lab reports. Forged prescriptions. It was all there in black and white. As I delved deeper into the files, I uncovered the true extent of the operation. Richard had set up a fictitious pharmaceutical company, using it to supply counterfeit drugs to pharmacies and clinics. Even worse, he was using these fake medicines in his own hospital, bribing doctors to cover up the deception. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. What should I do with this information? Going to the police seemed like the obvious answer, but I hesitated. What if James was involved? And what about Lily? She was living in that house, surrounded by these dangerous people. As night fell, I made a decision. Despite everything that had happened, I needed to talk to James. He deserved to know what his father was doing. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my heart pounding. After several rings, he answered. "Erica?" His voice was confused, wary. "Why are you calling?" "James, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about your father. There's something you need to know." He was silent for a few seconds, and then he asked me to meet. I agreed, and James gave me an address, a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As I drove there, my emotions were in turmoil. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. James was sitting in a corner booth, looking haggard and older than I remembered. As I slid into the seat across from him, I noticed dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that I'd never seen before. "Erica," he began, his voice low, "I've been working with the police for months. We're building a case against my father and his entire operation." I stared at him, stunned. "What? But, the divorce? Amanda?" James ran a hand through his hair. "It was all part of the cover. I needed to distance myself from you, to keep you safe. Amanda is an undercover officer. We needed a way to get her into the family circle without suspicion." My head was spinning. "So, our marriage, it wasn't real?" "No, Erica," James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Our marriage was the only real thing in all of this. I love you. I've always loved you. Pushing you away was the hardest thing I've ever had to do." Tears welled up in my eyes as relief and anger warred within me. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped." "I couldn't risk it," James said, his voice pained. "My father's network is vast. If there was even a hint that you knew something, you'd be in danger. I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to you." As James continued to explain, I learned the full extent of the investigation. It wasn't just Richard involved, there were corrupt doctors, pharmacists, and even government officials implicated. The case was massive, with potential ramifications that reached far beyond our small town. "But what about Lily?" I asked, suddenly remembering my niece's fear. "She's living in that house, James. She's scared." James's face darkened. "I know. We're working on a way to get her out safely. But it's complicated." We talked late into the night. When we finally parted ways, James pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry for everything I put you through," he whispered. "When this is all over, I promise I'll make it up to you." I clung to him, savoring the feeling of being in his arms again. But as I drove home, a nagging worry settled in my stomach. Despite James's assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was in immediate danger. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. Lily's name flashed on the screen, and my heart raced as I answered. "Aunt Erica." Lily's voice was a panicked whisper. "They're packing. They keep saying they need to get out before it's too late." I sat bolt upright, fully alert now. "Lily, listen to me carefully. Are you safe right now? Can they hear you?" "I'm hiding in my closet," she replied. "But I don't know how long before they—" Suddenly, there was a commotion on the other end of the line. I heard Lily gasp, followed by the muffled sound of a struggle. "Lily? Lily!" I shouted into the phone, but the line went dead. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I threw on some clothes and rushed out of my apartment. I knew I should call James or the police, but there was no time. When I arrived at the house, I saw frantic activity through the windows. Shadows moved back and forth, and I could hear raised voices inside. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door and rang the bell. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, the door swung open, revealing Richard's surprised face. "Erica, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice strained. I plastered on a fake smile. I left some of my things here when I moved out. I was hoping I could collect them." Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before he could respond, I heard Lily's voice from inside the house. "Aunt Erica, help me!" Without hesitation, I pushed past Richard and ran into the house. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Suitcases were strewn about, drawers left open, papers scattered everywhere. Margaret stood in the living room, gripping Lily's arm tightly. "Let her go," I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. What happened next was a blur. Richard lunged at me, but years of yoga had made me quicker than he expected. I dodged his grasp and made a dash for Lily. Margaret, in her surprise, loosened her grip, and Lily broke free, running towards me. We almost made it to the door when I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. Richard had grabbed a heavy bookend and struck me. I stumbled, my vision blurring, but I managed to push Lily towards the door. "Run, Lily! Get help!" I shouted as I fell to my knees. The last thing I saw was Lily's terrified face as she ran out the door. Then, darkness engulfed me. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I found myself bound to a chair in what looked like Richard's study. My head throbbed, and I could feel something warm trickling down my neck, blood. Richard paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "We need to leave now. Before the police arrive." "What about her?" Margaret gestured towards me. Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw a coldness there that chilled me to the bone. "We can't leave any loose ends." Suddenly, we heard the distant wail of police sirens. Richard and Margaret froze, panic etched on their faces. "It's too late," Richard muttered. "We need to run. Now." As they rushed to grab their belongings, I struggled against my bonds. The sirens grew louder, and I heard car doors slamming outside. Richard and Margaret were shouting at each other now, their carefully constructed facade crumbling in the face of imminent arrest. Just as I felt the ropes loosen, the study door burst open. James rushed in, followed by several police officers. "Erica," he cried, running to my side and quickly untying me. As the police handcuffed Richard and Margaret, reading them their rights, James pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. When Lily called me, I came as fast as I could. I sagged against him, relief washing over me. "Lily? Is she safe?" James nodded. "She's outside with a social worker. She's shaken up, but she's okay." The next few days passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. I was diagnosed with a mild concussion from Richard's attack, but the doctors assured me I would recover fully. As I sat in the hospital bed, James by my side, we watched the news unfold on the small television in the corner of the room. The arrest of Richard, a prominent figure in our community, had sparked a media frenzy. Headlines screamed about the counterfeit drug king and the hospital of horrors. "The scale of this operation is unprecedented," a grim-faced police chief announced at a press conference. "We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and countless lives put at risk." As we were listening to the news, reliving the traumatic events, a knock at the door interrupted us. A tall, serious-looking woman in a suit entered the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Detective Laura Chen. I'm leading the investigation into your father's operation. I was hoping I could ask you both a few questions." Over the next hour, we recounted everything we knew. James explained his involvement with the police investigation, while I shared the information Lily had gathered and the events leading up to my confrontation with Richard and Margaret. Detective Chen listened intently, taking notes. When we finished, she looked at us with a mix of admiration and concern. "You've both been through a lot," she said. "And I'm afraid it's not over yet. The trial is going to be long and difficult. Are you prepared for that?" James and I exchanged a look. "We'll do whatever it takes to see justice done," I said firmly. As Detective Chen left, promising to keep us updated on the case, another visitor arrived, Lily, accompanied by her social worker. "Aunt Erica," she cried, rushing to my bedside and throwing her arms around me. I was so scared. "I thought they were going to hurt you." I held her tight, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "It's okay, sweetheart. You were so brave. You saved us all. But we have another long battle ahead of us." And long it was. The case dragged on for over 2 years, making headlines across the country. As I recovered and we tried to rebuild our lives, the trial loomed over everything. Finally, after months of testimony and mountains of evidence, the verdict came in. Richard and Margaret were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. All their assets, including the trust fund they had set up for Lily, were confiscated as proceeds of crime. As we left the courthouse after the sentencing, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? So many lives had been destroyed, including those of people I had once considered family. After the dust settled from the trial, James and I focused on rebuilding our lives. The most important part of that was Lily. We'd grown so close during the ordeal, and now it was time to make it official. The adoption process was a whirlwind of paperwork and interviews, but finally, we stood before a judge who declared us Lily's legal guardians. As we left the courthouse, Lily between us holding both our hands, I felt a surge of emotion. "We did it," I whispered to James, tears in my eyes. He squeezed my hand. "We're a real family now." With guardianship came the responsibility of managing Lily's inheritance from her parents. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to do right by her. "What do you think about renting out the house?" James suggested one evening as we pored over financial documents. I nodded. "Good idea. We can put the rent money into a savings account for her college fund." We threw ourselves into the task, finding reliable tenants and setting up a separate account for Lily's future. It felt good to be planning for her future, to be giving her the stability she deserved after everything she'd been through. As we settled into our new normal, James approached me one night with a nervous energy about him. "Erica," he began, taking my hands in his. "These past few years, they've been hell. But they've also shown me how strong we are together. I was wondering, would you marry me again?" I laughed, tears springing to my eyes. "Are you kidding? Of course I will." We decided on a small ceremony, just close friends and family. The day arrived, bright and clear. As I slipped on my bright blue dress, a color of hope and new beginnings, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Lily knocked on the door, already in her bridesmaid dress. "Aunt Erica? You look like a princess." I twirled for her, feeling light and happy. "And you look absolutely beautiful. Are you ready to go?" She nodded eagerly, taking my hand. As we walked down the aisle together, I saw James waiting for me, his eyes shining with love. It felt like our first wedding all over again, but better, because now we knew what we could overcome together. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. As we exchanged vows, I looked out at our small gathering of loved ones, at Lily beaming beside us, and I knew that this was exactly where I was meant to be. At the reception, James pulled me close for our first dance. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Harrison again?" he murmured in my ear. I grinned up at him. "Even better than the first time." Later, as I watched Lily twirling on the dance floor with her friends, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Our path hadn't been easy, but we'd made it through. We were stronger for it. The next week, I was back at work, tutoring my French students online. Life had returned to a kind of normal, but it was a new normal, one filled with love, laughter, and the joy of our little family. My name is Hannah, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been working at the National Archives and Records Administration. It's a job I've always enjoyed, surrounded by history and important documents. But lately, I've been feeling like something's missing in my life. I lost my parents when I was in my early 20s. It was a car accident, sudden and devastating. Since then, I've been on my own, throwing myself into my work and trying not to think about how lonely I felt. But as I approached my mid-30s, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wanted a family of my own. "Hannah, you coming to the break room? We're having cake for Jim's birthday," my colleague, Lisa, called out. As I followed Lisa to the break room, I couldn't help but notice how she kept glancing at her phone, probably texting her husband. I felt a pang of envy. The break room was crowded with my coworkers, all chatting and laughing. Jim, a balding man in his 50s, was cutting the cake. "Here you go, Hannah," he said, handing me a slice. "You know, my nephew's about your age. Single too. Maybe I should introduce you to?" I forced a smile. "Thanks, Jim, but I'm okay." This wasn't the first time a coworker had tried to set me up. I'd been on a few dates with guys from work, but they all seemed, well, not what I was looking for. Too focused on their careers, or too immature. I wanted someone stable, someone who understood the value of family. Later that day, as I was organizing some files, my supervisor, Mr. Johnson, approached my desk. "Hannah, I've got a new case for you. A farmer from upstate is looking for information on a neighboring plot. Says it's abandoned and he wants to buy it. Think you can handle it?" I nodded. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. I'll get right on it." "Good. He'll be coming in tomorrow morning. His name's Daniel Miller." As Mr. Johnson walked away, I couldn't help but feel a little excited. A farmer. That was different from our usual clients. I wondered what he'd be like. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. I'd spent extra time on my appearance, though I tried to convince myself it was just another day. As I settled at my desk, my colleague Lisa gave me a knowing look. "Someone's looking nice today," she teased. "Hot date?" I rolled my eyes. "No, just meeting a new client. A farmer looking for property records." Just then, Mr. Johnson appeared with a man I assumed must be Daniel Miller. My jaw nearly dropped. This was not the old, bearded farmer I'd imagined. Daniel was tall, probably in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. He wore jeans and a plaid shirt, looking somewhat out of place in our office full of suits. "Hannah, this is Mr. Miller," Mr. Johnson introduced us. "He'll be working with you on finding those property records." Daniel extended his hand. "Please, call me Dan." "It's nice to meet you, Hannah." His handshake was firm, his hands calloused from hard work. I felt a flutter in my stomach that I quickly tried to squash. "Nice to meet you too, Dan. Shall we get started?" As we settled into my workspace, I couldn't help but notice how Dan's presence seemed to fill the room. He had a quiet confidence about him that was intriguing. "So, tell me about this property you're interested in," I prompted, trying to keep things professional. Dan leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "It's the plot next to my farm. Been abandoned for years. I'm hoping to expand, maybe start an orchard. But first, I need to track down the owners." As he spoke, I found myself drawn in by his passion. It was refreshing to see someone so enthusiastic about their work. We spent the next few hours poring over old property records. Dan was surprisingly knowledgeable, asking insightful questions that made our search easier. As we worked, we fell into an easy conversation. "So, how long have you been farming?" I asked during a lull. Dan's face softened. "Born and raised on a farm. Took over from my dad about 15 years ago. It's not always easy, but I love it." There was something in his tone that made me curious. "Sounds like there's a story there." He hesitated for a moment. "Well, it's just me and my boys now. My wife, she passed away a few years back." My heart clenched. "I'm so sorry, Dan. That must be hard." He nodded, a sad smile on his face. "It is. But my boys, they keep me going. They're 7 and 5 now. Great kids." I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. I lost my parents years ago. I know it's not the same, but I understand loss. The rest of the day flew by. We made good progress on the property search, but it was clear we'd need more time. As Dan was leaving, he hesitated. "Listen, Hannah. I know this is unconventional, but would you like to grab a coffee sometime? To discuss the case, of course." I felt my heart skip a beat. "I'd like that, Dan. For the case, of course." Over the next few weeks, Dan and I met regularly, ostensibly to work on his property case. But our conversations often strayed beyond land records and legal documents. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. One day, as we were wrapping up our work, Dan hesitated. "Hannah, I hope I'm not overstepping, but would you like to come out to the farm this weekend? Meet the boys? We're having a little barbecue, nothing fancy." My heart raced. This felt like a big step. "I'd love to, Dan. Are you sure the boys would be okay with it?" He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "They've been asking to meet you." I may have mentioned you once or twice. That Saturday, I found myself driving out to Dan's farm. The city gradually gave way to rolling hills and open fields. As I pulled up to the farmhouse, I saw Dan and two young boys waiting on the porch. "Hannah," Dan called out, waving. "Come meet the boys." I stepped out of the car, suddenly nervous. The younger boy hid behind Dan's leg, while the older one eyed me curiously. "Boys, this is Miss Hannah from the archives. Hannah, these are my sons, Jack and Tommy." Jack, the older boy, stepped forward. "Do you really work with old stuff all day?" "That's cool." I laughed, feeling myself relax. "I do. Maybe I can show you some interesting documents sometime." Tommy, still shy, peeked out from behind Dan. "Do you like chickens? We have chickens." And just like that, the ice was broken. The boys led me on a tour of the farm, showing me their favorite spots and introducing me to various animals. Dan followed behind, a soft smile on his face. As the day went on, I found myself falling into an easy rhythm with Dan and the boys. We grilled burgers, played catch in the yard, and ended the evening roasting marshmallows over a small fire. As the boys dozed off on a blanket nearby, Dan and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. "Thank you for today," I said softly. "It's been wonderful." Dan turned to me, his face serious. "Hannah, I need to be honest with you. I like you. A lot. And I think you might feel the same. But I need you to understand, the boys and we're a package deal. It's not always easy, being a single dad and a farmer." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "Dan, I like you too. And your boys are amazing. I know it won't be easy, but I'd like to see where this goes. If you want to, that is." Dan's face broke into a wide smile. He reached out, taking my hand in his. "I'd like that very much, Hannah." The months that followed were like a dream. Dan and I grew closer, and I found myself spending more and more time at the farm. The boys, Jack and Tommy, warmed up to me quickly, and I discovered a maternal instinct I never knew I had. One crisp autumn evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dan turned to me with a serious expression. "Hannah, these past 6 months have been the happiest I've had in years. I know it might seem fast, but when you know, you know. Hannah Thompson, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "Yes, Dan. Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding was a simple affair, held on the farm with only our closest friends and family present. As I walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress, I saw Dan waiting for me, looking handsome in his suit. Jack and Tommy stood beside him, beaming. However, my joy was slightly dampened when I overheard Dan's parents talking during the reception. "She's awfully thin, isn't she?" his mother muttered. "Not sure she's cut out for farm life." "Give her time, Martha," his father replied. "She'll toughen up or she'll break." I tried to shake off their words, focusing instead on the happiness of the day. But a seed of doubt had been planted. After the honeymoon, I moved to the farm permanently. It was a big adjustment, leaving my job and city life behind. Dan suggested I quit working to focus on the house and children, and I agreed, eager to embrace my new role as wife and stepmother. At first, everything seemed perfect. I threw myself into farm life, learning to cook hearty meals, tend to the vegetable garden, and even help with some of the lighter farm work. The boys seemed to thrive under my care, and I loved reading to them at night and helping with their homework. But as weeks turned into months, I began to feel the strain. The work was endless and grueling. I'd never realized how much physical labor went into running a farm. My hands, once soft from office work, became calloused and rough. Dan's parents, who lived nearby, were frequent visitors. His mother, Martha, took every opportunity to criticize my efforts. "You call this a proper farm breakfast?" She'd scoff at my attempts at cooking. "In my day, we'd have had 3 different kinds of meat on the table by now." I tried to brush off her comments, but they stung. Dan, busy with the farm work, seemed oblivious to my struggles. One particularly difficult day, as I was struggling to wrangle a stubborn cow into the barn, Dan called out from the tractor. "Come on, Hannah, put your back into it. Food doesn't just appear on the table, you know." I bit back a retort, feeling a mix of frustration and hurt. This wasn't the life I had imagined when I said I do. That night, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I'd lost weight, my hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under my eyes. The manicured nails and styled hair of my city life seemed like a distant memory. As the months wore on, the demands of farm life began to take their toll. I was up before dawn each day, preparing breakfast for Dan and the boys, packing lunches, and then diving into a never-ending list of chores. Feeding animals, cleaning coops and stalls, helping with the crops, it was relentless. One particularly grueling day, I woke up feeling awful. My head was pounding, and I could feel a fever coming on. But as I lay in bed, contemplating calling in sick, to whom, I wasn't sure, I heard a sharp knock at the bedroom door. "Hannah, are you planning to sleep all day?" It was Martha, my mother-in-law. I groaned, forcing myself to sit up. "I'm not feeling well, Martha. I think I might have a fever." She burst into the room, her face a mask of disapproval. "Nonsense. In this family, only death is an excuse not to work. Now get up and make me some breakfast. Then there's work to be done in the yard." Stunned and feeling too weak to argue, I dragged myself out of bed. As I mechanically prepared Martha's breakfast, I could feel my body protesting every movement. "Here you go," I said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. She took one bite and grimaced. "Overcooked. But it'll have to do. Now get out there and earn your keep." I stumbled out into the yard, my vision blurry and my body aching. The world seemed to spin as I made my way to the chicken coop. As I bent down to clean it out, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it out of the coop before vomiting. Wiping my mouth, I looked up to see Dan watching me from the tractor. "You okay?" he called out. I shook my head weakly. "I think I'm sick, Dan. I need to lie down." He frowned. "We can't afford for you to be sick right now, Hannah. The work needs to get done. Just push through it." Tears stung my eyes as I watched him turn back to his work. I felt so alone, so unsupported. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. That night, as I lay in bed, my fever raging, it was Jack and Tommy who took care of me. They brought me water and cold compresses, their little faces creased with worry. "Are you gonna be okay, Hannah?" Tommy asked, his voice small. I managed a weak smile. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Thank you for taking care of me." As the boys left the room, I heard Dan's voice in the hallway. "Boys, leave Hannah alone. She needs to rest so she can get back to work tomorrow." In that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the life I wanted. This wasn't the family I dreamed of. I needed to make a change. But just as I'd made this resolution, life threw me another curveball. A few weeks later, as I was getting ready for another day of endless chores, a wave of nausea hit me. But this time, it wasn't from illness. With shaking hands, I took a pregnancy test. As I waited for the results, my mind raced. A baby? Now? How could I handle a newborn on top of everything else? When the test showed positive, I felt a mix of joy and terror. I had hoped for some reprieve from the grueling farm work, but my expectations were quickly dashed. If anything, the demands on me seemed to increase. "You're eating for two now," Martha would say, piling more work on my plate. "That means you should be working for two as well." I was 7 months along when Dan's father approached me one afternoon. "Hannah, we need to clear out the old storage room for the baby. Get to it, will you?" Exhausted and aching, I nodded silently and made my way to the cluttered room. As I sorted through years of accumulated junk, I came across a dusty old box tucked away in the corner. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a leather-bound book. As I flipped it open, my heart nearly stopped. It was a diary, belonging to Marie, Dan's first wife. I knew I shouldn't read it, but something compelled me to do so. As I began to read, tears started streaming down my face. Marie's words painted a picture of a life not unlike my own: endless work, constant criticism, and a husband who seemed oblivious to her struggles. But as I read on, the entries became darker. "The pain is unbearable," one entry read. "I begged Dan to take me to a doctor, but he says we can't afford it. His parents say I'm just being weak. But I know something is wrong. I can feel it." My hand shook as I turned the pages. The final entry made my blood run cold. "I can't take it anymore. The pain, the work, the loneliness. They won't let me get help, won't even buy me medicine, because it's an unnecessary expense. I'm sorry, my sweet boys, but I can't go on like this. Dan, your parents, this is on you. I hope you can live with what you've done." I closed the diary, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't just a diary, it was a suicide note. Marie hadn't died from an illness as I'd been told. She had taken her own life, driven to desperation by the very people I was now living with. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The way Dan and his parents treated me, their callousness towards my health and well-being, it wasn't new. They had done this before, and it had cost a woman her life. I carefully hid the diary in my room, my mind racing. I couldn't let history repeat itself. I couldn't become another Marie. 2 months had passed since I gave birth to my daughter, Emily. The joy of motherhood was overshadowed by the relentless demands of farm life. Night and day blurred together as I struggled to care for a newborn while still tending to Jack and Tommy, cooking meals, cleaning the house, and managing the endless chores that came with the animals. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry outside, I heard raised voices coming from the barn. Curiosity and concern propelled me forward, and I crept closer to listen. "You killed her," Jack's young voice cracked with emotion. "You and Grandma and Grandpa, you killed Mom." The sharp sound of a slap echoed through the air, followed by Dan's furious voice. "Don't you dare say that again, boy. You think you're so smart, huh? Well, if you're too smart for your own good, maybe you don't need school anymore." My heart raced as I listened, frozen in place. Dan continued his tirade, his voice growing louder. "From now on, you'll work on the farm full-time. You'll earn your keep like the rest of us. You don't need an education to work here. You'll learn what really matters, how to put food on the table." I felt sick to my stomach. Jack was only 9 years old. The thought of him being denied an education, forced to work full-time on the farm, it was unthinkable. The next morning, Dan announced he was leaving for a 3-day farm produce fair with his parents. As soon as their truck disappeared down the driveway, I sprang into action. "Jack, Tommy," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. "Pack a bag with your favorite things. We're going on a trip." As the boys scrambled to pack, I gathered Emily's essentials and a few of our belongings. I retrieved Marie's diary from its hiding place and tucked it safely into my bag. Within an hour, we were in my old car, driving away from the farm. The boys were quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation. Emily slept peacefully in her car seat, oblivious to the turmoil around her. Using my meager savings, I rented a small apartment in the city. It was cramped and nothing like the farmhouse, but it was ours, and it was safe. The next day, I reached out to my old contacts at the archive. They were surprised to hear from me, but eager to help. With their assistance, I managed to track down information about Marie's parents. My hand shook as I dialed the number. A warm, elderly voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Johnson? This is Hannah. I was married to your son-in-law, Dan." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Is everything all right? We've been trying to get in touch with the boys for years. Dan cut us off after Marie, after we lost her. Please, can we see them?" It turned out the Johnsons lived in a neighboring town. They invited us to visit, eager to reunite with their grandchildren and meet Emily. The moment we arrived at the Johnsons' house, I felt a wave of warmth and acceptance wash over us. Marie's parents, Ellen and Robert, greeted us with open arms and tear-filled eyes. "Oh, look at you all," Ellen exclaimed, hugging Jack and Tommy tightly. "You've grown so much." Robert gently took Emily from my arms, cradling her with the practiced ease of a grandfather. "And this little one, she's beautiful, Hannah." Once we were settled inside, I knew it was time. With shaking hands, I pulled Marie's diary from my bag. "There's something you need to see," I said softly, holding out the diary to Ellen. As they read, their expressions changed from curiosity to horror to grief. Tears streamed down Ellen's face, while Robert's jaw clenched in anger. "We knew something was wrong," Ellen whispered. "But we never imagined, oh, Marie." Just then, my phone rang. It was Dan. I steeled myself and answered. "Where the hell are you?" he growled. "Get back home now, or I'm calling the police." I felt a surge of courage. "No, Dan. I'm not coming back. In fact, I'll be the one contacting the police. Don't call me again." I hung up, my heart racing. Over the next few days, with the Johnsons' support, I set our plan in motion. I contacted Child Protective Services, providing detailed accounts of the abuse and neglect the children had suffered. Then, clutching Marie's diary, I walked into the local police station. The detective listened gravely as I recounted everything: the forced labor, the medical neglect, Marie's suicide. "This is extremely serious," the detective said. "We'll need to investigate thoroughly. Are you willing to press charges?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "For all of us." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Dan and his parents were arrested and brought in for questioning. The farm was searched, and more evidence of abuse was uncovered. The boys were interviewed by child psychologists, bravely recounting their experiences. It was heart-wrenching to hear their stories, but I was so proud of their courage. Finally, after months of legal proceedings, we found ourselves in the courtroom for the final verdict. I sat between Ellen and Robert, holding Emily close, with Jack and Tommy on either side of us. The judge's voice rang out clearly. "In light of the overwhelming evidence, this court finds the defendants guilty of child abuse, neglect, labor exploitation, and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Marie Johnson." I heard Ellen's sharp intake of breath beside me. The judge continued. "Daniel Miller is sentenced to 10 years in prison. His parents, Martha and George Miller, are each sentenced to 7 years." As the gavel came down, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, sadness, and hope. I looked at the boys, seeing a weight lift from their young shoulders. In the aftermath of the trial, our lives began to take on a new shape. Marie's parents were godsends. They opened their home to us, providing a safe haven as we navigated the choppy waters of our new reality. "Your family now, Hannah," Ellen said one evening, as we sat on their porch watching the kids play in the yard. "We're here for you, whatever you need." Their support was unwavering. They helped with childcare during the seemingly endless court proceedings and meetings with lawyers. Robert would often take Jack and Tommy fishing, giving them a chance to just be kids again. Ellen doted on baby Emily, singing her the same lullabies she once sang to Marie. With their encouragement, I hired a skilled divorce lawyer. The Johnsons insisted on covering the legal fees. The divorce proceedings were mercifully straightforward, given Dan's incarceration. When it was finalized, I was awarded full custody of all 3 children and substantial compensation from Dan's assets. As much as I appreciated the Johnsons' hospitality, I knew it was time for us to stand on our own feet. Using part of the settlement money, I rented a comfortable apartment in the city, close to my old workplace and a well-regarded school. The day I walked back into the National Archives felt like coming home. My colleagues welcomed me with open arms, and my boss was more than accommodating about my need for a flexible schedule. Enrolling the kids in school was a bittersweet moment. Jack and Tommy were excited but nervous, having been out of formal education for so long. Emily started at a nearby daycare. I'll never forget the lump in my throat as I watched them all head off that first morning, their backpacks seeming too big for their small shoulders. Ellen and Robert were frequent visitors, their presence a constant reminder that we weren't alone. They doted on all three children equally, showering them with the grandparental love they'd been denied for so long. One Sunday afternoon, as we all sat around the living room after a big family lunch, Robert cleared his throat. "Hannah, Ellen and I have been talking," he began, looking slightly nervous. "We've updated our will. We want you and the kids to be taken care of, no matter what happens." I was stunned. "But I'm not." Ellen reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're our daughter now, Hannah. And those are our grandchildren. We want to make it official." Tears welled up in my eyes as the magnitude of their gesture hit me. This was what family was supposed to be, unconditional love and support. As I looked around the room at the faces of my children and these two wonderful people who had embraced us so completely, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. My name is Sarah, and I've always believed that family is the most precious thing in life. I'm married to my loving husband, Jack, and we have two wonderful adult children, our son, Michael, and our daughter, Emily. Michael followed in his father's footsteps and became an engineer, while Emily pursued her passion for art. I couldn't have been prouder of both of them. Emily's artistic career took off quickly after college. She organized exhibitions that drew quite a crowd, and I never missed a single one. I remember her first major show like it was yesterday. The gallery was packed, and Emily's paintings were the talk of the evening. As I walked around the gallery admiring Emily's work, I spotted her talking animatedly with a tall, handsome man. Little did I know then that this man, David, would become her husband and the father of my granddaughter. Their whirlwind romance was a joy to watch. David seemed to adore Emily, and she was happier than I'd ever seen her. They married in a beautiful ceremony just a year after they met, and soon after, Emily announced she was pregnant. I was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. When little Sophia was born, I fell in love all over again. She had Emily's dark curls and David's green eyes, a perfect combination of both her parents. It was around this time that Emily made a decision that surprised me. She announced that she was quitting her job to work from home and raise Sophia full-time. "Are you sure about this, honey?" I asked her one afternoon as we sat in her living room, watching Sophia play with her blocks. "Your career was just taking off. I'd be more than happy to help with Sophia if you want to keep working." Emily shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "I appreciate the offer, Mom, but I want to do this myself. I'm ready to sacrifice my career for Sophia. She needs me right now." I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off about this decision, but I respected Emily's choice. After all, she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. As the months passed, I noticed that Emily became more distant. Our regular coffee dates became less frequent, and when I called, she always seemed to be busy. As Emily drifted away, I found myself spending more time with Michael and his wife, Lisa. When they had their son, Tommy, Lisa asked if I could help out as a nanny. Of course, I jumped at the chance. And so, I threw myself into my role as Tommy's nanny. It was exhausting but rewarding work, and it helped fill the void left by Emily's absence. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if Emily was upset about the time I was spending with Tommy. I wanted to talk to her about it, but she kept avoiding my calls and canceling our plans. As Christmas approached, I held on to hope that Emily would reach out. I imagined us all gathered around the tree, Sophia opening presents with wide-eyed wonder. But as the days ticked by, that hope began to fade. On Christmas Eve, I sent Emily a message. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. We miss you and would love to see you tomorrow. Love, Mom." Hours passed, with no response. I tried to focus on the joy of having Michael, Lisa, and Tommy over, but Emily's absence cast a shadow over the festivities. Christmas morning came and still no word from Emily. As we sat around opening presents, I couldn't help but notice the empty spot where Emily, David, and Sophia should have been. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael asked, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Just thinking about how fast you've all grown up." But inside, I was seething. This wasn't just about missing a family gathering anymore. This was about crossing a line. After the presents were opened and the dinner was cleared away, I turned to Jack. "We need to go see Emily," I said firmly. "This has gone on long enough." Jack knew better than to argue when I used that tone. He nodded, and we began gathering gifts for Emily, David, and Sophia. As we pulled up to their house, I noticed that the curtains were drawn, and the Christmas lights that Emily usually put up were noticeably absent. My heart sank a little more. We approached the front door, arms laden with gifts. Jack rang the doorbell, and we waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours before we heard movement inside. The door creaked open, and there stood Emily. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of her. She looked different. Tired, yes, but there was something more. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, seemed dull and weary. She was wearing long sleeves, despite the warmth of the house, and she held herself as if she was in pain. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We missed you at the family gathering, so we thought we'd bring Christmas to you." Emily's eyes darted nervously behind her before she stepped onto the porch, partially closing the door behind her. That's really nice of you, but you shouldn't have come. I'm not feeling well, and I didn't want to get anyone sick." It was then that I noticed the bruise on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. My motherly instincts went into overdrive. "Emily, what happened to your arm?" I asked, reaching out to her. She flinched away from my touch, pulling her sleeve down. "Oh, it's nothing. I had a little accident the other day. Slipped in the bathroom. Clumsy me." I exchanged a glance with Jack. We both knew she was lying. "Where's Sophia?" Jack asked, trying to peek inside the house. "We brought her some presents." Emily's face softened at the mention of her daughter. "She's napping right now. But I'm sure she'd love to see you. Maybe she could come visit you tomorrow?" I nodded eagerly, grasping at this olive branch. "Of course. We'd love to have her over." We chatted for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and uncomfortable. Emily kept glancing back at the house, as if afraid someone would overhear. As we were about to leave, I couldn't help but pull Emily into a hug. She stiffened at first, but then melted into my embrace. For a moment, I felt like I was holding my little girl again. The next day, I woke up early, my mind still reeling from our visit to Emily's house. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing Sophia's favorite foods and setting up some art supplies. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I rushed to answer it, finding Emily standing there with Sophia. My heart ached at the sight of my daughter, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting trouble. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Sophia's excited to spend some time with you." I knelt down to Sophia's level, opening my arms. "Hello, sweetheart. Grandma's so happy to see you." Sophia hesitated for a moment before running into my embrace. I held her tightly, breathing in her sweet, familiar scent. Emily handed me Sophia's backpack. "I've packed some of her things. I'll be back to pick her up this evening, okay?" I turned my attention to my granddaughter, determined to make the most of our time together. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go see what fun things Grandma has planned." We spent the afternoon drawing, baking cookies, and playing with dolls. It was wonderful to see Sophia laugh and play, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She seemed more subdued than usual, often glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. As we sat coloring together, I decided to gently probe. "Sophia, honey, is everything okay at home?" Sophia's crayon paused mid-stroke. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. Mommy cries a lot, she said quietly. My heart clenched. Why does Mommy cry, sweetheart? Sophia shrugged, returning to her coloring. Daddy yells at her. He says mean things. I tried to keep my voice calm, even as anger and fear surged through me. What kind of mean things, Sophia? He says Mommy is stupid and can't do anything right. Sometimes he grabs her arms really hard. Sophia demonstrated, gripping her own arm tightly. We sat like that for a while, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I couldn't let Emily and Sophia continue living in fear. As the afternoon wore on, Sophia's play took a disturbing turn. She began acting out scenes with her dolls, making them yell at each other and push each other around. Sophia, I said gently, where did you learn to play like that? She looked up at me, her face serious. That's how Daddy treats Mommy sometimes. After Sophia's revelations, I couldn't sit idle any longer. I called Lisa, my daughter-in-law, and asked if she could watch Sophia for a few hours. She agreed without hesitation, sensing the urgency in my voice. Jack, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination, we need to go to Emily's house. Now. He nodded, his face grim. I'll drive. The ride to Emily's house was tense, filled with unspoken worries. As we pulled up to their street, I suggested we speak to the neighbors first. Maybe they've heard something, I reasoned. It could give us a better idea of what's really going on. We approached the house next door, and a middle-aged woman answered. Her eyes narrowed as we introduced ourselves as Emily's parents. We're concerned about our daughter, I explained. Have you heard any disturbances from their house? Any arguments or screaming? The woman's face hardened. I haven't heard a thing, she said dismissively. They seem like a perfectly normal couple to me. Her arrogant tone set my teeth on edge, but I thanked her politely. As we walked away, Jack squeezed my hand reassuringly. We were about to knock on Emily's door when we heard it, David's voice, raised in anger. Why did you let Sophia go to your mother's? You know, I don't like her spending time there. My blood ran cold. Jack and I exchanged a look of horror before I jabbed the doorbell, my heart pounding. The shouting abruptly stopped. Moments later, David opened the door, a pleasant smile plastered on his face. Sarah, Jack, what a surprise. What brings you here? He asked, his voice eerily calm. I peered past him, my eyes widening as I saw Emily struggling to her feet. Without a word, I pushed past David and rushed to my daughter's side. Emily, sweetheart, are you all right? I asked, checking her for visible injuries. She nodded weakly, avoiding my gaze. Anger surged through me as I turned to face David. How dare you treat my daughter like this? I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. I know what's been going on here, and I won't stand for it any longer. David's facade cracked for a moment before he regained his composure. I think you've misunderstood, Sarah. I'm simply trying to raise my wife properly. She can be quite difficult sometimes, you know. Raise her? I spat. She's your wife, not your child. And there's nothing proper about abuse. David's eyes narrowed. Why don't we ask the neighbors? They'll tell you everything's fine here. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. The neighbors were complicit in this abuse, turning a blind eye to Emily's suffering. I think it's time for you to leave, David said coldly. I need some time to cool down. We can discuss this misunderstanding later. Before I could protest, he was out the door, leaving us alone with Emily. As soon as he was gone, Emily broke down. Through her tears, she began to reveal the full extent of her ordeal. David had forced her to quit her job, isolated her from family and friends. He controlled her every move, checking her phone and taking away her car. He told the neighbors I was a bad wife and mother, she whispered. That he was raising me to be better. They all believed him. I became an outcast in my own neighborhood. My heart shattered as I listened to my daughter's pain. I held her tightly, vowing silently that I would do whatever it took to get her and Sophia out of this nightmare. He's gone to get more alcohol, Emily said, fear creeping into her voice. He'll be back soon. As we began to plan our next move, I knew we were in for a fight. But looking at my daughter's bruised but hopeful face, I knew it was a fight worth having. No matter what it took, we would free Emily from this cycle of abuse and bring her home where she belonged. I turned to Emily, my voice firm but gentle. Sweetheart, I want you to pack your things and Sophia's. You're coming home with us. Emily's eyes widened with a mix of hope and fear. But Mom, what about David? He'll be so angry. Jack stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. That's his problem, not yours. I'm your father, and I'll protect you. Both of you. With trembling hands, Emily began to gather their belongings. I helped her, moving quickly and efficiently, knowing time was of the essence. Within minutes, we had packed the essentials into 2 suitcases. As we left the house, I could hear murmuring voices. A group of neighbors had gathered near the gate, their eyes following us with disapproval. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face pinched with judgment. You should be ashamed, she spat at me. You've raised your daughter poorly. She should be grateful that her husband tolerates her and takes care of her and the child. Anger surged through me. Without a word, I gently took Emily's arm and pushed up her sleeve, revealing the dark bruises that mottled her skin. Is this what you call taking care? I asked, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. Would any of you like to be raised like this? The neighbors' faces flushed with embarrassment, and they quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact. We hurried to the car, Jack helping Emily with the suitcases, while I kept watch. Just as we were about to leave, I spotted a familiar figure running towards us. David, I gasped. He was red-faced with rage as he reached the car, immediately grabbing for Emily. What do you think you're doing? He snarled. Before I could react, Jack was there, pushing David away from the car door. Don't you dare touch her, he growled. Stay away from my daughter. David's eyes darted between us, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The situation was escalating quickly. We need to call the police, I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. As I dialed, Jack ushered Emily into the car. We quickly locked the doors, our hearts pounding as David circled the vehicle like a predator. You can't take her, he shouted, kicking the car in frustration. She's my wife. I spoke calmly to the 911 operator, explaining the situation while keeping an eye on David's increasingly erratic behavior. Emily sat in the back seat, her face pale with fear. It's okay, sweetheart, I reassured her. The police are on their way. We're going to be fine. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, David's shouts growing more desperate. I could see neighbors peeking out of windows, witnessing the scene but doing nothing to intervene. Finally, we heard sirens in the distance. David's face contorted with panic, and for a moment, I thought he might try to run. But he stood his ground, a defiant look in his eyes as the police cars pulled up. The arrival of the police brought a momentary sense of relief. Officers quickly assessed the situation, examining Emily's visible injuries and taking statements from all parties involved. The tension in the air was palpable as David was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. He'll be detained for a few days while we investigate, one of the officers informed us. We'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement, Mrs. Thompson. Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emily bravely recounted her experiences to the police, her voice growing stronger with each retelling. I stayed by her side, offering support and corroborating her story where I could. However, our hope for a quick resolution was dashed when David's lawyer presented a united front of neighbors all claiming that Emily and David had a perfectly normal relationship. She's always been dramatic, one neighbor testified. David's a saint for putting up with her. Their words made my blood boil, but I reminded myself to stay calm for Emily's sake. Determined to prove Emily's innocence, we agreed to a lie detector test. I held my breath as she answered question after question, her voice steady despite the stress. When the results came back confirming her truthfulness, I felt a surge of vindication. A psychological evaluation followed, revealing the depths of Emily's trauma. "Your daughter is suffering from severe depression, likely stemming from prolonged domestic abuse," the psychologist explained to me privately. "She'll need ongoing support and therapy." Despite the mounting evidence, David remained adamant about his innocence. His latest threat to seek full custody of Sophia sent Emily into a panic. "He can't take her, Mom," she sobbed. "I can't lose my baby." That's when I knew we needed to dig deeper. I hired a private detective, hoping to uncover something in David's past that would expose his true nature. Weeks passed as the detective worked tirelessly. Emily and Sophia stayed with us, slowly beginning to heal in a safe environment. Watching my daughter rediscover her smile was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Finally, the detective called with news. "Mrs. Thompson, I found something you need to see." The information he presented was shocking. David had a history of domestic violence in another city. He'd been ordered to undergo therapy but had fled the state before completing the program. "There's more," the detective said grimly. "I've collected testimonies from other victims. The pattern is always the same: charm, control, then violence." As I leafed through the files, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at David for causing so much pain, relief that we finally had concrete evidence, and sadness for all the women who had suffered before Emily. "Thank you," I said to the detective, my voice thick with emotion. This changes everything." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. I sat beside Emily, squeezing her hand reassuringly as we waited for the proceedings to begin. Our lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Henderson, arranged the stack of evidence before her. As the judge called the court to order, I could see David across the room, looking smug and confident. That confidence, however, began to waver as Ms. Henderson presented our case. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to present evidence of Mr. David Thompson's history of domestic abuse." One by one, she laid out the detective's findings, police reports from David's previous city, incomplete therapy records, and testimonies from past victims. David's lawyer objected vigorously, but the judge overruled him, allowing the evidence. Then came a moment that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ms. Henderson called forward a witness, Sarah, David's ex-girlfriend from 7 years ago. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted her experiences. "He would fly into rages over the smallest things. The bruises. I had to cover them with makeup every day." Next, Ms. Henderson presented Emily's lie detector results and psychological evaluation. "As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Emily Thompson's account has been verified by multiple professional sources." The coup de grace came in the form of voice messages David had left on Emily's phone. His threatening voice filled the courtroom. "If you ever try to leave me, I'll make sure you never see Sophia again." Just when I thought we'd presented everything, Ms. Henderson surprised us all. "Your Honor, we have one more witness. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Sophia Thompson to the stand, accompanied by her child psychologist." My heart clenched as I watched my 5-year-old granddaughter walk to the front of the courtroom, her small hand clasped in the psychologist's. Sophia's eyes were wide, but her voice was clear as she spoke. "Daddy would yell at Mommy a lot," she said. "He would push her and say mean things. It scared me." Then came the moment that left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Sophia's psychologist presented a video to the court, a shaky, dimly lit clip that Sophia had recorded on her mother's phone one night when she'd been woken by shouting. In the video, David's enraged voice could be clearly heard, along with the sound of something shattering and Emily's frightened pleas. As the video ended, I could see tears in the judge's eyes. David sat slumped in his chair, all pretense of innocence gone. The judge's verdict came swiftly and decisively. David was sentenced to prison for domestic abuse, with mandatory counseling. Emily was granted a divorce, awarded 50% of their shared property, substantial financial compensation, and full custody of Sophia. David was barred from any contact with Sophia until she turned 18, and even then, only if she chose to see him. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Emily collapsed into my arms, sobbing, not from fear this time, but from sheer relief. "It's over, Mom," she whispered. "It's finally over." As we left the courtroom, I saw David being led away in handcuffs. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something I never expected: regret. But it was too little, too late. As I stood in my kitchen, preparing a feast for our weekly family dinner, I couldn't help but smile. The house was filled with the cheerful noise of my grandchildren playing, the aroma of roasting chicken, and the gentle hum of conversation from the living room where Emily and Michael were catching up. It had been 6 months since the court hearing, and the change in our family was palpable. The dark cloud that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a warmth and joy that I had feared we might never experience again. Emily and Sophia had moved in with Jack and me after the trial. At first, I worried it might be challenging for all of us to adjust, but those fears quickly dissipated. Having them close allowed us to provide the support and love they needed to heal. Sophia, my brave little granddaughter, was making remarkable progress. The nightmares that had plagued her in the early days after leaving David had become less frequent. Now, more often than not, I would hear her giggling with her cousin Tommy as they played elaborate make-believe games. "Grandma, look," Sophia called out, running into the kitchen with a drawing in her hand. "I made this for you." I wiped my hands on my apron and knelt down to examine her artwork. The page was filled with bright colors, a stark contrast to the dark, scribbled drawings she had produced in the months following the trial. This picture showed our family, stick figures with big smiles, standing in front of a yellow house, with a rainbow arching overhead. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Why don't we hang it on the fridge?" As I stood up, I caught sight of Emily watching us from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. The change in her was just as remarkable as Sophia's. The haunted look in her eyes had faded, replaced by a spark of life that grew brighter each day. "Need any help, Mom?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "You can set the table if you'd like," I replied, gesturing to the stack of plates on the counter. As we worked side by side, I marveled at how natural it felt. These simple moments of domesticity, once taken for granted, now felt like precious gifts. Emily had started drawing again, something she hadn't done since the early days of her marriage to David. Her studio, once Jack's old office, was filled with canvases. I had watched her art evolve over the past months, mirroring her healing journey. The first pieces had been dark and chaotic, all harsh lines and somber colors. But gradually, light began to creep in. Now, her latest works were explosions of color and life. "I have some exciting news," Emily said as she laid out the silverware. "The gallery downtown wants to feature some of my new pieces in their upcoming show." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." Emily beamed, her eyes shining with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. She had recently started working part-time at a local art supply store, slowly reintegrating into the workforce. It was a small step, but an important one in reclaiming her independence. As we all gathered around the dinner table that evening, Jack, Michael, Lisa, Tommy, Emily, Sophia, and me, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but looking at the smiling faces of my family, I knew it had been worth every struggle.